but we have been tracking the discussion and the dialogue. And a follow-up question for Ms. Stewart, actually, because some of what we're pointing to in the SAVE Act is not hypothetical. At the state level, we've seen some of this attempted already. I think one of the most recent examples of a citizenship voter ID law was in the state of New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. Do you have any feedback, observations from recent elections in New Hampshire and how this helped or hurt the voting process?
Yeah, so we have the two examples with the person who had to go back 3 times to get the right documentation, which that, you know, when you're trying to vote and trying to get this done, it creates an issue. And this is before, you know, a national law on this. This is just at the state level. We have already seen that the states who have done this, people have encountered issues, and women in particular. And so, again, I think that we have to take note that this is already happening in the states where documentary proof of citizen is requirement or already a requirement, and think about whether or not, I mean, it's just a real question, do we actually want people to vote in this country or not? And depending on where you land on that, at the Legal Women Voters, we feel like people are entitled to the right to vote, especially when you're of age and eligible. If you choose to exercise your right to vote, it should not be additional barriers. Right. You should be able to do that and know that your vote is going to be executed and that your vote is going to be counted and contribute to democracy. And right now, I think that is threatened.
I agree. And actually, Congress, a lot of people have forgotten or never knew, is actually on the record on this. For all the attention that the Voting Rights Act gets, appropriately so, for all the attention that HAVA, from an administrator standpoint, for a lot of the attention that HAVA gets, appropriately so. Let's not forget the National Voter Registration Act, which was passed on an overwhelmingly bipartisan basis, which includes language that, yes, it is the finding of Congress that we should, government should facilitate voter participation without any undue barriers or obstacles. Yeah. So how are we living up to that? And that's, I think, the lens that we should be viewing all these proposals, not just the SAVE Act, but right. Others proposed by Republicans and Democrats for that matter.
And may I just say, when we were negotiating the National Voter Registration Act, this came up. It is in congressional record how this was negotiated. They tried, the proposers of the initial bill, tried to put documentary proof of citizenship in the bill. Both Republicans and Democrats agreed that it would be a barrier. It took multiple sessions, 2 sessions for the National Voter Registration Act to actually pass. But this came up back then, and both Democrats and Republicans agreed that this would be an unnecessary and critical barrier to people voting. Nothing has changed dramatically since that time that would warrant this type of bill. So I think if we look back to legislative history and where we are now, we have to remember that this work has already been done by both parties, and it landed on the right side, which is allowing people to have access to vote.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Proaño. Most of the explanations I hear from my Republican colleagues about the need for proof of citizenship appear to be grounded in anti-immigrant sentiments. Can you discuss how Latino voters would disproportionately be impacted by voter roll purges that would occur as a result of the SAVE Act?
Well, thank you, Senator. The SAVE Act is unnecessary and unduly burdensome. We've seen a case in Texas, for example, where they moved to purge 100,000 voters.
I want to make sure your mic is on. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. The SAVE Act is unnecessary and unduly burdensome. We've seen cases in Texas where in 2019 they purged 100,000 voters, predominantly Latinos. We litigated that. 99% of those were enrolled, and what we found was that it was illegal. The state of Texas actually ended up paying a $450,000 legal fine as a result. Our concern is that, you know, when you take long-term view, as it stands today, there are 62 million Latinos. There are 32 million Latinos that are eligible to vote, about 13% of the U.S. population. But if you look out to 2050, there'll be 100 million Latinos, 65 million that are eligible to vote, about 20 to 25% of the total eligible voters. This law will discriminate against more Latinos into the future than any other law that was currently under consideration. And that's one of the reasons that we oppose this bill.
I appreciate the reminder about, again, not hypothetical. This has happened in Texas. And indulge me for a minute with my former Secretary of State head on to just describe a real-world example for those watching at home. Right? If there's somebody like my parents who immigrated to this country and became United States citizens, if you became a citizen the day before an election, right? You're of age, you're now a United States citizen, you're eligible to vote in that election if you live in a state that allows you to register that close to election day. Thankfully, there's a good number of states that offer same-day registration, et cetera. But just because you take the oath of citizenship doesn't mean that the Department of Homeland Security is maybe notifying Social Security right away or notifying the IRS right away. And so when a state or a local jurisdiction is trying to verify is this person a non-citizen or a citizen, those other federal records may not be updated on a timely basis, and you could be kept from voting as a result. So it's, again, it's not a stretch to see how the voter suppression or obstacles appear pretty quickly here.
And this is very much exactly that, a voter suppression campaign. I was taking a look at the data last night. Out of all 50 states and District of Columbia, the Latino vote only increased in 8 of those states. Latino vote declined in 42 states, including the District of Columbia. Okay? 10% of Latino votes did not show up this election cycle.
Thank you.
Because of these tactics.
Want to turn to Ms. Meek. I apologize I missed your verbal testimony, but I did read your written testimony that you submitted prior to today. Now, from your testimony, it's clear that you're familiar, intimately familiar with the challenges that military families face in order to vote. As people making the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, it would be immensely hypocritical and offensive to limit service members and their families' ability to vote in elections. Do you feel that military voters and their families receive sufficient support from the Department of Defense, such as the Federal Voting Assistance Program and voting assistance officers?
Thank you for that question. The Federal Voting Assistance Program does offer critical support, and the voting assistance officers can be very helpful. But there are a few areas that we think could be expanded on the support that's offered. One, expanding their support to military family members, including military spouses. Right now, we know that we have a military spouse friend of mine has attempted to get support from one of those voting assistance offices, and they were ultimately unresponsive to her. They didn't see her as a spouse as part of a group that they were responsible for serving. She had just moved. She was trying to navigate this process of participating in and being able to vote from her new location, and had to involve her husband, who ultimately had to engage his command just to get a response and get support to vote. So this was someone who was very determined, and she's experienced in voting from voting absentee, and she was able to advocate for herself. But as you can imagine, many young voters, young military members, young military families might not go through all that work, that whole process just to be able to get support to vote. And additionally, the second thing that would be helpful from the Federal Voting Assistance Program is ensuring that all of the voting assistance offices are properly staffed. Another military spouse shared that her son, after her and her spouse had retired from the military, her son joined a service academy. And this was his first election, being able to vote absentee from his new location. He reached out to his parents for help in navigating that process, since they had a legacy of military family service. They guided him to connect with the voting assistance office, and ultimately the webpage that they went to was a 404 error. They couldn't find phone numbers. So it's things like that also get in the way of military families being able to vote, and support services that could be expanded. They're critical services, but there are some areas that could be expanded to further support military families.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for you on the military voting experience, but I want to take a pause at the moment to